Welcome to the Midnight Bible Study. One of the most encouraging scriptures is found in James 1:2-4. Count it all joy. I'll read it to you. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into trials, when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. So that's an interesting way to start off. Count it all joy when you fall into trials and tribulations and hardships. Who does that? A lot of people don't do that. It's kind of counter instinctual and intuitive. But that's what it says, and it goes on to tell why. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Now, patience is a virtue. It's one of the fruit of the Spirit. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So this is when we fall into various trials, it's for our benefit. We're profiting from these trials because as a result of it, we're going to be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. What more could we ask for? It's just going to take a while to get there. Now, Romans 5:2-5 says, through whom we also have access by faith into his grace in which we stand, and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations. Who does that? Glory in tribulations? Ouch. No. But where are we going with this? And not only that, we also glory in tribulations, knowing that the tribulations produces perseverance. So there's a benefit there. This is extremely benefit. Perseverance is extremely valuable to us. Why? For example, one of them says, one scripture says, he who endures to the end shall be saved. So perseverance and endurance is part of being saved, according to the Apostle Paul. He run the race as if you want to win, and he who endures to the end will be saved. Very important. But we glory in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character. So God is not only working on our perseverance, but He's building our character. We're going to benefit because we're going to have a godly character. We're going to be the kind of character that God wants us to be. And character produces hope, which is a wonderful fruit of the Spirit, and it gives us glory and joy and hope in life. So hope is a wonderful thing, and so we're profiting in many ways from this tribulation that we're facing. So we may face one tribulation, and we're getting a cascade of benefits from it. Not going to be easy in the short term, but just know, keep your hope alive, because this story has a happy ending. 1 Peter 6:7 says, in this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, though tested by fire, may be found to the praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Christ. So we're tested. The genuineness of our faith is tested, and we go through trials and tribulations. But there's a reward at the end, because our faith may be found to the praise or honor and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And what more can we want than that? That's literally everything. That's wonderful. Hebrews 12:10. For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but He for our profit, that we may be partakers of His holiness. So we may be chastened, but is there a benefit to this? That we may be partakers of Christ's holiness. Do we want to be partakers of Christ's holiness? Absolutely. That's on a scale of 1 to 10 importance, that's a 10. How about James 1:12? Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life. Okay, so we're going to have to go through struggles. We're going to be tempted by various things in life. But what does the Bible say about that temptation? Blessed is the man who endures temptation. Why? For when he's been approved, he will receive the crown of life. So this is not a small benefit here. So next time we're facing temptation, we need to remember that we're looking at we could receive the crown of life if we endure that temptation. And how really these temptations, how important are they? Most of them are passing and of minor value and of much grief. On the other hand, we could weigh that against a crown. How difficult of a choice is that? There's a story about Joseph speaking of someone who's faced tremendous trials and tribulations was Joseph. He had a dream of greatness. He had many brothers, and he was a shepherd, and they were in a remote area. And he was out there, and he told his brothers, hey, by the way, I had this dream where all of you guys were kneeling down and bowing to me. Well, they didn't like this one bit, and they were pretty harsh brothers. They said, all right, there's no way we're ever going to bow down to this kid. We don't like him. He's our father's favorite. We're going to throw him in a pit and leave him to die. That was literally what happened. They threw him in a pit and left him to die. But then as they were leaving, you could, by the way, speaking of trials and tribulations, you can imagine how Joseph felt on the bottom of that pit, that his own brothers had done this to him. But as they're leaving, they noticed some slave traders from Egypt passing by, and they said, hey, wait a minute, we can sell our brother into slavery and make some profit here. So that's what they did. They sold him into slavery. Joseph, again, as Joseph is being carried away on camels to Egypt, just imagine how he must have felt. His own brothers had sold him into slavery. It's hard to even imagine. But he went there, and he ended up being a servant in the royal palace in Egypt. And so, as a servant, he was a very good servant. In fact, he was such a good servant that the king was very impressed with him. And things were going very well for him. But then he was tempted. Remember, what do we do? It says here, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life. That's in James. That's the New Testament, long after Jacob. But Jacob was tested, long after Joseph. And Joseph here was tested, and he was tempted by the king's wife, the queen. She tried to seduce him, and he was a righteous kid. He was not a scoundrel. And he said, I will not do this evil thing. And he literally ran from temptation. He ran. Well, the queen had just been rejected by a servant. She was proud, and she was furious. And she told the king that he tried to seduce her, and that was enough to get Joseph thrown in prison. Well, now Joseph, first he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Now he's been lied about by the queen and thrown into prison by the king who he had given such great service to. So now he's literally, rotting away in a prison cell. That's trials and tribulations. And he's in there with another servant who was thrown in there for another reason of the king. And one night this guy had a dream, and Joseph interpreted it for him. And he said, you know what, in a few days, based on that dream, you're going to be released in a few days. And he said, look, it's when you get out, tell the king, that I didn't do it. Tell him what I did for you. Just remember me. Tell the king to let me out of here. So the guy got out, and of course he forgot. He forgot to tell the king. He just totally forgot about Joseph. Well, eventually, Joseph is sitting in there, forgotten. And eventually the king has a situation where, he needs an interpretation for a dream. All his magicians, they all failed. So he calls, but someone says, hey, this. Then the servant remembers. He says, oh, you know what? There's your former servant Joseph. And he goes, oh yeah, Joseph. He goes, yeah, he he's in prison with me. He interpreted my dream, and nobody could interpret the king's dream, and this was important. So, the king said, "Look, get him out of prison, and if he can interpret my dream properly, I'll make him prime minister of Egypt." So that's what happened. Joseph was let out of jail. He interpreted the dream, which was basically that they're going to have 6 years of prosperity and then 6 years of famine. And so that's what happened. He was made prime minister. He's put in charge of the grain because, after all, they were going to be facing famine, and he was the one who knew about it. He was now prime minister of Egypt. So during the 6 years of prosperity, they stored up a lot of grain and made a lot of money. And then came 6 years of famine when people in the lands all around them were dying. And people were starving, literally starving. His own family back in Israel, his own brothers who had sold him away into slavery, they were starving to death. Joseph is sitting there in prosperity in Egypt as prime minister. And eventually his father sent his brothers down there and said, "Go get some grain." I'm going to shorten this story up. But what happened basically is, with a lot of negotiating, his brothers didn't recognize him, and when they did, they were horrified, and they felt horrible that they, had sold their brother into slavery. And not only that now he was prime minister and in power to get revenge and throw them in prison. But ultimately, what happened is I'm going to skip what happened. I'll get to the end of the story, which is Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God?" So rather than getting vengeance, Joseph said, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God?" Remember, God revenge is for God only. "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." So what this means, obviously, is that this is divine providence. God allowed Joseph to suffer, suffer these horrible things, to be thrown in a pit and sold into slavery and thrown into prison just for doing the right thing. God allowed all this to happen. And why did he allow it to happen? Because it was for the good. It was to save the lives of many people. And that's what it says here. He says, but you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is to this day, to save the lives of many people, to save many people alive. And so God allowed Joseph to suffer for a good reason, that many lives would be saved. That's the providence of God at work in our life. God's providence works in our life. Sometimes God allows us to suffer. We don't realize it when we're in the midst of suffering, but he's doing it for some good, for some benefit. So there's something good is going to come out of it in the end. And we're going to look back one day and say, "I'm thankful that happened, because it worked out for the better." So there you go. There's what it means when God says, "Count it all joy." God bless you, and good night from the Midnight Bible Study.